reasons. And I think you're going to really find that this is a really, really interesting conversation that we're about to have. So before we get into it, Jen, please introduce yourself, share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Thank you, Tony. Hi, everyone. My name is Jen. I am a mother of 2 small children, and I'm also an attorney and an athlete. I love to run races, whether it's a 5K, anywhere from 5K to a half marathon. And I'm also a power lifter, so I am currently training for my next powerlifting meet. So I'm just always active, always doing something, and so energy and being able to do a million things is a really important thing for me.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to get into it more about like how you're able to juggle all the things that you do, but it is pretty amazing. You know, being an attorney is a really demanding job alone, and then being a wife and a mom, it's a lot of work, and staying physically active and healthy. So, but you definitely do it well. So the first
Thank
question.
you. Sometimes I wonder why I do all of this, but I do, but I do love it. So it's just the life I've chosen for myself, and I need a lot of energy to get through my days.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. All right, so let's go into the first question. So what was the main challenge or obstacle you were looking to solve before starting to work with me?
So, and this has become clearer as we've worked together over the past few months, but there were several things that were going on, and the main one being that I can't even use enough words to describe that I was always hungry. Like, it didn't matter how much food I'd eaten or what was going on in my day, or like if I had just had a large meal or haven't had a large meal, I was always hungry. And a big part of that is because I'm a very active person and I'm constantly running and I'm constantly on the move. So I know that I'm generally burning a lot of calories, but I just can't I just can't do enough to say that I was always hungry. I remember our first phone call, and I remember when I was telling you on the phone, like, I am always hungry. I almost broke down into tears when I said that out loud, because it was something that had really been eating at me for, no pun intended, for a really long time. And then the other piece was that I'd been having a lot of digestive issues. So before we started working together, I was in the morning, I would have my breakfast and I would have my coffee, and then I would spend a great portion of the morning in digestive discomfort, and I didn't know what was causing it. And I actually went back to look at the forms to see what I had written to you when we were doing our intake, and I saw on there that I'm allergic to something. I don't know what it is. But so I had there were times when it was hard for me to sit down because the bloating and the discomfort were so extreme every morning. And then and a part of that was something that I would eat was causing me to crash really hard. So a lot of times when I tried to go to the doctor to talk about this, I would get, you have fatigue because you're so busy. You have fatigue because you have 2 small children and you're not sleeping through the night, or you have fatigue because your hormones are out of whack, or you have fatigue for all these reasons. But those weren't quite resonating with me. And I really felt that when I would, try to go and have a conversation with my physicians, that they weren't quite hearing what I was telling them. And so another reason why I wanted to work with you is because I really wanted to like have the journaling and have the record of like, here's what I'm eating and here's how I feel after I eat, in
Mhm.
order to identify what was causing me to have these crashes.
Mhm.
And then finally, there is the piece that, you know, that I wanted to be able to lose a little bit of weight. And whenever I was told about a particular diet, or I was told about, do higher protein or do this or do that, it never seemed quite right for me. So a lot of diets that are out there are incredibly restrictive on the number of calories that you can consume. And that didn't make sense for me because I have a very active lifestyle. So I'm like, I just don't think that's enough food. Keto is another very popular diet that didn't seem to make sense for me because I'm like, well, if I'm running and if I'm doing these active things, I feel like I need carbohydrates for energy. So I'm not sure that that even makes sense for me. And I couldn't get a program and I couldn't get to talk to somebody who was listening to my particular circumstances. Everybody was so focused on you must lose weight and you got to lose it fast that they weren't thinking, okay, but how can we sustain this particular person's energy levels?
Right.
And so I just couldn't find anything like that.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. So you definitely had like a couple of things. And I think most people, and it's funny you said like as we started working together, you recognized it more. But I think,
Mm,
yeah, most people think like I just want to lose weight, right? Like that's like the
right,
one thing. But then they really
right,
when you really unpack like what's going on, like there's so
right,
many other things between your skin and your digestion and your energy and your bloating and all of those things and performance. It's like it's usually more than one thing, so thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we are able to communicate so regularly that I could constantly provide that feedback that otherwise it would be I don't really know how else I could help you, to be honest. Like
right.
that.
And I think that was why there was such a disconnect when I was trying to get help before, especially in a clinical setting, is that they see you and then they don't see you for 4 weeks. And
Right.
so there's no way to really give feedback in terms of like, here's what I tried, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. And when you don't have somebody that's kind of watching what's going on with you,
Mhm.
it's hard to really communicate like, no, really, like, this isn't normal, or no, really, like, we're not talking about just the kind of fatigue from like not getting enough sleep at night. Like, this is something different. And I think, for me, with doctor's appointments that last 20 minutes, and you have, it's almost like an audition. You have 20 minutes to like tell this person your whole life story and everything you're struggling with. And then at the end, they make a snap judgment as to what kind of treatment you need. And I just really was feeling like I wasn't getting what I needed.
Right.
And every time they'd be like, oh, well, you just need to lose some weight, or, oh, well, you're an attorney, you have a stressful job. So, you really need to work on cutting back stress. And I have to tell you, Tony, I did a lot to try to work on those aspects. I changed jobs. I really worked to get help at home with the kids so that I could get a full night's sleep. I did so much work on the nutrition things, and none of it was working. And I'm like, there is something wrong and I don't know what it is, and I need somebody to help me figure it out.
Yeah.
And I was really at the point of desperation. And so it was funny because it was right at that point that I started listening to different podcasts with regards to fitness, and that's how I found you and started following you. And there was a lot of things about you and your rhetoric and what you say that were really speaking to me. And one of the things was, I just want to tell you this because I
Oh.
I love it. You do it all the time, but you're like, well, and you take a minute. And so it's almost a very lawyerly thing too. It's like, well, it depends. If you are this type of person, this might work for you. But if you're this type of person, then that might not work for you. You have to do something different. And it really depends on the individual. And you always go back to, well, it really depends on the individual. And so I was like, well, this might be somebody who might actually listen to me and, and help me do something that makes sense for me, even if it doesn't make sense for someone else.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you recognize that, because that's exactly what I strive to do. So I think we kind of already talked about like kind of what wasn't working on your own.
Yeah, I do have a couple things I wanted to add on that piece though, because I do think that this is something that a lot of people might be able to relate to, which is that on my own, I was really trying to work on counting calories. And so I would really, I would be like, okay, so, let's try to calculate the number of calories I'm supposed to eat in a day. And like, here's my activity levels, and here's the amount of weight I want to lose, which means I should eat X number of calories. And I was really afraid, even though I was hungry, I was really afraid to deviate from what I had determined was the calculation of calories that I was supposed to eat in a day. Excuse me. And so I was heavily under eating, and I knew I was under eating, but I was really afraid to figure out like, okay, well, I'm under eating, but what should I be eating? What should I be eating more of? What should I be eating less of? I don't know.
Right.
And then I also had a lot of guilt because I am the primary, in addition to everything else that I do, I am the primary food planner and food maker for the family. So every weekend I go to the grocery store and I figure out what everybody, 4 people, are going to eat for an entire week. And it's on me. So if I'm eating unhealthy foods and I'm too tired to make food, they're eating fast food, and that's on me. That's my decision. And so I was having all the guilt of like, I can't possibly get the energy to cook something. So now my family has to eat fast food, and that's on me. I've failed them because I'm now making them fast food. And so one of the things that you and I worked with that I really appreciated was having default meals that weren't fast food. And that was really important to me because I'm like, I'm responsible for all these people. And we can talk about family members and having support, but my husband is like not. He is just completely unable to put together a meal and figure out what we're gonna eat. He just love him to death, but like he just can't do it. So it falls to me to do it, and I had all this guilt, and so every time I'd just be like, oh my gosh, I need to eat more, but then you feel guilty because you're eating more, or you're having fast food, and then you feel guilty because you're having fast food, and so I was in this like shame spiral. And I just couldn't put that together on my own.
Yeah, I think, and that's a really, really good point, and you're right. Yeah, I mean, there's also the difference between like going back to your point about calories is like, what the calorie calculator tells you to eat versus like real world application versus how you feel versus like, your life and your family and all those things. And so I think what you're expressing is that like you didn't know any other way other than that one way, and it clearly wasn't working, so it left you feeling guilty and affecting the other areas in your life, not in a positive way. So yeah,
Definitely.
no, I know that's a common one. That's definitely a common one for sure. So what was it that we implemented together that you felt was different than maybe in the past, or working with anyone else or not? What was something that we did together that you felt was something different than you've done before?
Right. Well, we started making changes, I think, from the very beginning. I think it was like day one, you're like, well, you're hungry, so let's get you to eat more.
I do remember that. And I remember I feel like because you also work out at night. So in
Right.
your mind, you were like, okay, well, I'm gonna work out later, and then I eat, and then but it was like, well, no, because you end up overeating at dinner, and then you'll have
Right.
a better workout if you go with like a light meal, whatever. So yeah, I remember that was like the first thing we did. I just had you eat more during the day. That was like basics 101. Let's go.
You were like, well, let's get you to eat more. Yeah. So I really appreciated that from the get-go, you were asking what's not working for you. Like, what are your biggest challenges right now today? And
Mhm.
let's do something right now. And so from the beginning, we just had me eating more food earlier in the day, which was like that was a huge change for me, because in my mind I really had to work on undoing some habits where I felt like I couldn't go over a certain number of calories before a certain time of the day. And I'm not entirely sure why
Mhm.
this was a thing that I just held on to. But yeah, so I remember we started off by adding more food, adding a snack before dinner. And then another big change was that we started adding a lot more protein,
Mhm.
even in places like breakfast. Like, I didn't realize that at like breakfast time, I wasn't really getting any significant amount of protein. And so that was a big change too. It's like, let's get you more protein,
Mhm.
spread it out throughout the day, and let's just get you eating just more food generally.
Mhm.
And then the other piece was really going back to basics and saying, okay, here's what our plate should look like. And let's, take the time to think about, like, what's going to be your carb source, what's going to be your protein source, what's going to be your vegetables, and
Mhm.
thinking about your making up your plate, which I'd always heard from different sources. I mean, people talk about the plate method all the time, but
Mhm.
I hadn't I didn't really know how to implement that for myself.
Right.
Um,
Right.
right. Because I'm like, yeah, but like a certain amount of protein seems too little for me. So that doesn't make sense. Like, maybe I need, and so I always would get lost in the specifics of like, well, this amount seems too little for me
Mhm.
and my particulars. And so the plate method doesn't work because it's just not enough food.
Right.
But we really worked on being like, no, well, we can still do the plate method, but maybe you just add more protein, or you add more of this or the other
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then eventually we moved away from counting calories and more into macros,
Mhm.
which was really scary. I'm going to be totally honest. I was like, I don't really know how to do the macro thing, but if you hold my hand through this process, Tony, I will work on that. And that was really great. Like, mentally, for me, mentally, and because macros is more about getting in, like, you have to, it's calories seems very negative, like you're excluding food,
Right.
but macros seems like you need to get to a certain amount. So you need to get to a certain amount of grams of protein, and you have to get to a certain amount of grams of carbs.
Mhm.
And so that, just switching that mentality really helped me a lot.
Totally. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I never even thought about it that way. But I think it's really amazing to think about. I mean, Jen and I have been working together for 6 months. She just re-upped for her another 6 months, which is so
So I
awesome.
can do all my races.
Yeah, so just so exciting. Yeah. So but I think if you really think about it, like within 6 months, you went from changing your complete mindset to actually eating more, to no longer being afraid of like, food, and knowing that you don't need to actually count calories, to transitioning to actually not being afraid to track, whereas probably in the past tracking calories was felt very restrictive, where in this way it kind of felt like, like, oh, I'm fueling my body, like this feels
Yeah.
good. And to now being at a point where we're actually, Jen's like no longer really tracking her macros. She doesn't really need to, in the sense like she knows what makes her body feel good, and she no
Yeah.
longer needs to really kind of, figure it out. It's like it's pretty much ingrained in her bones now. The only reason why she's continuing is because we love working together, and because she's doing like a lot of races and stuff, and so a little bit of her nutrition will change, but she has such a solid base and understanding of her body's needs that it's just going to be kind of like little mini tweaks here and there, and then the obviously the accountability of having the calls. And like, one thing we identified really early on too was you need to sign up for things. Like you
Yeah.
need to be in races, otherwise, because now her exercise routine is structured for the race, but without anything like ahead, we found like Jen, you were kind of like less motivated to work out.
Yeah.
You didn't really have like
Yeah.
a kind of a quote unquote reason to. And so those were the time periods where we recognized like, okay, we need to like have something to like keep you going. And that was, I think, something else that we did, which was really helpful for you.
Yes. But I also think, reflecting back on it, it's hard to see when you're in the middle of it, but reflecting back, I think that we were doing so much good work on my nutrition that I really needed a little time. There was a time when like my workouts were kind of down, and I realized looking back that I needed that time to come to a better relationship with food. And, uh, looking back, I just see that I had I did not have a good relationship with food. Me and food were not besties
Mm-hmm.
before you and I started working. And I had a lot of fear with regards to what I was eating and when I was eating it and whether it was good for me or bad for me. And I think I just needed a little time to heal that relationship and feel more confident about the food choices.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know at the time, but I think taking that little bit of a break from the workouts helped me just focus a little bit more on my food, like what my body actually needed to eat, which is really great.
Yeah, which is really awesome. And I think that that's really powerful. And I think fortunately, because we were working together, that was possible, right? Whereas when someone's kind of on their own, no exercise means not eating well. Like it just
Right.
like they usually go hand in hand, but
Yeah.
you use that opportunity to take full advantage of this of the fact that this is, and also too, we also talked about too, like sometimes it's really not even a priority. Like,
Right.
and don't get that confused with like your health is never a priority. Your health is always a priority. But in that time when you were under the amount of stress with your work, it was around the
Mhm.
holidays, your kids, everything was, there was just a lot of stuff going on. The biggest
Right.
priority for you was your mental health, your stress
Yeah.
management,
Yeah.
and focusing on your nutrition, believe it or not, and like fitness and exercise, like you're gonna get back to that. Like we know that
Right.
in about 2 weeks, like you'll get back to that, and it's not going to impact the way that you feel as much as not eating well would make you feel each day.
Right.
And then not exercising, but as long as you're still doing all the other things, like it's okay for a week or two, or even I think it was maybe even a month for a little.
Mhm.
It was a big time, but it was enough. It was what you needed at that
Yeah.
time, in the
Right.
grand scheme of things. And even in the moment, now I'm like reflecting on
Right.
it too. I remember like that was actually going back to what you're doing, which is amazing, is just focusing on what you actually need and being
Right. Just
honest with that answer.
letting go of the guilt. I feel like there's just all this like pressure.
Yeah.
Or and I've always felt this pressure, like you have to be working out, you have to be doing all these things. And it's very important.
Yeah.
But I just remember like a big part of it was letting go of that guilt. Like right now, there are things happening in my life and I need to focus on those things.
Correct.
And that's okay. And that's important. And the things that are happening right now are important things.
Right.
And so it's okay to, for a limited period of time, say, okay, we're going to put the other stuff in the back burner,
Mm-hmm.
and just focus on the things you need to focus on. And the greatest thing is we had come I had come so far in the nutrition at that point where I was even able to make my default be healthier meals anyway. So it's not like I had this period of time where I was just like eating fast food all the time. No, the nutrition was still there. So it was a great time to practice when you're stressed, when things are really like life is really happening to you. Like you can still eat the foods that will help you deal with it,
Right.
not just default to the
Or make
bad
it
habits from the
right.
past.
And when the bad habits we know would only make it worse. It would only make
Right.
it feel worse, and it would only, yeah, perpetuate everything else that was going on that was negative. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so what was the one outcome that we achieved together that you're the most proud of?
Okay. So I'm really excited about this one. So uh, we, well, I
Yeah.
was able to go fully gluten free.
Yes.
And I am really proud of that. Like, I'm so excited about the fact that I get to like say I'm gluten free. And it's not because of being into the fads of like wheat is bad for you or anything like that. But what's awesome is we talked about earlier this podcast about how I'd been having all these medical issues and I couldn't figure out what was wrong.
Right.
And then through it was even in my intake forms. I'm like, I have a suspicion
Yes.
that the allergy that I have is an allergy to wheat.
Mm-hmm.
But I was afraid to give it up because it's such a big deal. Like everything we eat has bread in it or some form of breading, or wheat is such a big part of our diet. I was afraid to let go of it. And you helped me give it up completely, which was great because I realized that that's what was making me so sick.
Right.
So and this is one where I can look back and we've so I was able to go gluten free for a period of time. I've even had instances voluntarily and involuntarily where I've consumed um, wheat products, and so now I know like what it actually does to me and how sick it actually makes me.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of my issues with digestion, a lot of my issues with heartburn, a lot of my issues with the fatigue can be tied to gluten. And so because I was able to give it up with your help, um, I feel a million times better. And I'm even like, oh my God, I can't believe that this one food was making me so sick. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's been like a mind-blowing realization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like it's interesting that it's so funny because it takes, and I know this in myself, like as a business coach, even as my own health journey, like you just need someone else to one tell you, to two like kind of give you permission, and then three coach you through how to do it, right? So like
Yeah.
you kind of already knew this, but there's a lot that comes with going gluten free. Like it is not easy because and like anybody who's listening to this podcast right now, like I don't like restricting anyone from anything because restriction makes you overeat. But when you're physically sick,
Yeah.
you sometimes have to do that. But then there's healthy ways to do that and not healthy ways to do that. And then
Right.
there's the point of like, how does your family going to react? How are you going to go through navigate social situations like that? Trying to be healthy with communicating with your
Right.
family and navigating social situations is hard enough. Now we have to add being gluten free on top of it when a lot of times, sometimes the gluten-free alternatives aren't even healthy. So it's like, it's really challenging. It's really challenging.
Very challenging.
So I'm really proud of you for kind of being even open about that, because you were open about that way in the beginning. So we were able to like pay attention to it right away. I was like, that's what this program's for. It's 6 months of
Right.
experimentation. I'm like, let's
Yeah.
experiment. Let's see how you feel. And you were just,
Right.
I'll never forget, like every call, you're just like, I just feel amazing. Like your energy is just like through the roof. And it's probably, that was like the one small change minus the fact that you were eating a little bit more. Right.
Yeah,
So,
well, I think there were a couple changes. I think the gluten-free was the biggest change that has completely changed my life because okay, This piece of it is something that just blows my mind. So I didn't know what it was like to feel full or like sated. Like I didn't know what it was. That's that feeling of you eat a meal and your body feels so good because you just ate that meal. I didn't know that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, and I didn't realize until I'd been gluten-free for a while,
Mm-hmm.
for me, almost my entire life, and I had no idea because this was my lived experience,
Right, and that was your normal.
this was my normal.
Yeah.
Being full meant feeling sick.
Mm.
So for example, Thanksgiving, right? We all talk about Thanksgiving. We all talk about like, oh, you're going to be eating all this food. You're going to feel terrible and bloated because you're eating all this food. So for my life, Thanksgiving meant I would be sick for weeks afterwards, right? Like with digestive discomfort, having to go to the bathroom a lot, like nausea.
Yeah.
So my normal, and people, and I didn't realize that it was not normal because the way that we talk about Thanksgiving
Yeah, exactly.
is similar to that, right? So for Thanksgiving, I would be ill. And we think about like stuffing, pie, like all these things that have wheat products in them that you eat in excess. So for my whole life, and I am 37 years old.
You're young. 37 years young. And beautifully glowing. Beautiful and glowing.
It's like a long time, right? To like to have this idea that fullness means feeling sick. So now we understand like why, like one of the reasons why I was always hungry wasn't just because my body couldn't achieve fullness, but because I wasn't eating to fullness all the time because I didn't want to, because that made me sick.
Right, right. Really good point.
So now I know that what that feeling is. And so it's like, wow, I feel like I just ate this food and I feel warm and I feel energized and I feel like that was really enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was not an experience that I'd had before. And that still blows my mind.
Yeah, I literally just was on interviewing somebody else right before you for the podcast, and we spoke about that. And I was like, I probably talk about it a lot on many podcasts, but like most people don't recognize that what they're settling for is not normal. It's their normal, but it's not normal. And so I have another one of my clients. She said this to me, and I'm sure I've heard it before too, but I don't know why. Like this time it stuck, and she just like, no, I'm creating my new normal. And so now every time we talk, she's like, well, this is how I want to be, so this can be my new normal. And it's like such a wonderful conversation to have. Like that's just a wonderful thing, like to recognize, to realize that what you're settling for right now is not normal, or you're not accepting it as your norm. But what can you do to create your new norm? And then and identifying what that new normal is. That new normal for you is energy every day. You know, obviously there's times you get sick, then there's times like sometimes it, like, you get a cold or whatever, but for the most part, your new normal is energy and feeling good and feeling satisfied after you eat and knowing how to fuel your body and all those things.
Yeah, and even performance in the gym. I mean, the things that I've been able to accomplish since I've gone gluten-free and gone on this more focus on this greater focus on macros, like my performance in the athletic endeavors that I have has just been amazing. Like it's awesome. Like it's just really cool to to do your strength training and be like, oh my gosh, look at how like I am so much stronger than I was 6 months ago. And because I'd hit a little bit of a plateau and I couldn't get past it in terms of strength training. And it was really frustrating. I'm like, why am I not building the muscle mass? Like, why am I not doing these things? And now it's like, here we are, we're doing it, and it's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm so proud of you. This is so awesome. Okay. So I always ask this question, because I have to remember that with all the marketing out there, that sometimes I hope I don't come off as skeptical, but you never know, because I think people don't always know what to believe at this point in their lives because there's just so much BS out there. But
Yeah.
I'm curious, were you skeptical at first when it came to joining the program?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. So there's a lot to unpack there. One is, you get thrown so much information and so much contradictory information. It's like, oh my gosh, you have to do keto, you have to do this, you have to do the other thing. Carbs are evil, sugar's evil. There's so much of the marketing out there is fear-based. So they want to make you feel bad or feel guilty or feel like you're doing something wrong. And again, I was looking, I was trying to like research and listen to podcasts based on fitness and diet and try to like read books on what I should be eating, and none of it was all, first of all, it was all contradictory, right? So like for every study that's out there, there's another study that's contradicting it.
Yep.
And I'm not a professional, right? I have my own things that I'm an expert in, but this is not one of them.
You're not a
And
nutrition professional.
what?
You're not a nutrition professional, but you are a professional.
Right, exactly. There are other things I'm an expert in, but not this.
Yeah.
And I and even within nutrition coaching, I feel like, because I've visited nutritionists in the past, and they're always like, well, let me prescribe this to you, this generic diet that they have. And again, my issue was, I don't think that this is what I need. Like, this doesn't make sense. It's not enough calories. This doesn't feel right to me. And so even within the nutrition community, I feel like there's a lot of difference between what kind of coaching you're going to get and what kind of help you're going to get. So, but again, what I liked about you is that, one, I could hear your podcasts, so I knew your philosophy. I could follow you on Instagram, so I could spend a little time vetting you, I guess is the right way to put it, and just seeing, okay, are the things that this person is saying, are they speaking to me? And what I like about what you say all the time, you're always like, well, it depends, but also you're like, well, my program is based on the individual, right? What works for you? Like, what works for one person may not work for the other person. And that was really important to me. I'm like, okay, I feel like if I work with this person, I'm not signing up for a generic program, right? I'm signing up for someone who's going to really look at my situation and try to help me. And so yeah, I was a little skeptical at first, but again, I followed you. I listened to your podcasts. And every time you were giving advice, it made sense to me. And sometimes you just have to go back to basics. Like, sometimes the advice is like, well, drink more water, or, well, let's go back to the plate method. Like, sometimes it's just like, you got to go back to the basics and get that solid foundation first before we do something else. But I really like that. So yeah, I was like super scared. And I remember after our phone call, I'm like, is this crazy? Like, what am I doing? Like, I'm like trusting this person that I don't really know. Like, what? Oh, but I was so desperate though at the moment, at that particular point in time. I was like, I just need something, and I feel like this is going to be helpful.
Yeah,
which
well,
it has been.
I'm really glad that it did, because I think that what can potentially happen is when you have kind of marketing that's preying on the food fears, they know that person, like, that's not how I think. When I do my marketing, I'm not thinking like, oh, this person's desperate, so like I'm going to try to hit all their pain points. Like, I hate that about marketing. But the reality is that when someone goes to your page and when someone's looking for change, they are desperate. And so in that moment, there's a possibility you could have went with anything. And by going with anything else, chances are
Mhm.
it could have just perpetuated that food fear. It could have just kept you stuck where you were. And it could have made, once you finally did come into the program, what we were doing together a lot harder and take a little bit
Right.
longer than it did
Right.
to improve. So I'm glad that you ended up doing it anyway. But I'm happy that you fell in my lap versus who knows where I
Yeah.
would have followed, fell into it.
Yeah.
So awesome. Okay. And then the last question before we maybe just talk about some other things would be like, what would you say to someone who's interested in joining the program, but maybe is like kind of feeling on the fence about it?
Yeah. Well, I would say, well, from my experience, I would say, like, don't hesitate. You absolutely, like, I've really appreciated all the work that you've done for me, all the coaching that you've done for me. So I would, definitely recommend you to anybody. But I guess what I would say is, like, if you're on the fence, then spend that time, like, listen to podcasts, follow you on Instagram, join the Facebook group,
Mhm.
spend a little time making sure that the content and what Tony says, that's something that speaks to you.
Okay.
Because if it speaks to you, then you're going to get that personalized coaching experience that's going to help you, right? So I would say, first of all, do it. Like, absolutely recommend the program, but also, like, you know spend a little time, like, there's no rush, so you can spend a little time listening to the different podcast episodes, listening to what you have to say, Tony, following you on Instagram, DMing you, you know communicating with you, just to get a sense whether that partnership works.
Totally.
For me, it worked great. And I think that you provide great coaching regardless of what the goal is. Mine was more, I want I want, to be able to build healthier meals. I want a healthier relationship with food. I want to fix some of my digestive issues. So I was more focused on sort of um, the medical area for me, as opposed to weight loss.
Mhm.
And I was also more interested, I've been more interested in the performance aspect, like, how do I eat in order to perform better for my races. But I think you do a really great job, just when you give advice on weight loss. I think you do a great job of that as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And honestly, working with you has been an absolute pleasure. I'm really excited to continue to support you with your journey and all your races and everything else. I'm really, really excited about it. I want to be mindful of your time. I didn't realize we went a little bit over, but is there anything else that you wanted to add or throw in? You also did the Healthy Livings Foundation course. So if you maybe want to talk a little bit about that, but whatever you have time for.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I did the Healthy Living Foundations course, which I really actually, I loved it. So um, I I feel like the Healthy Living Foundations was a great, like, back to basics, right? So, like, let's just talk about food, and let's talk about reading nutrition labels, and let's talk about social situations and how to handle situations. And there were a couple things that I thought were really great about your course that were just like the way that you could take that information and sort of implement it. I like that you ask people to develop some goals. So it's almost like a homework, right? Like, here, you just got all this information about nutrition. Name 3 action items for yourself. And then here's all this information on how to navigate social situations. Here are 3, develop 3 action items for yourself in a social situation. And so I like that you have kind of like the homework aspect of it, but it's not like a homework assignment, but just like, what are you going to do now that you have this information, which I think is really powerful. And then there's a support group, which I think is really great, because I think it's nice to be able to not just put together your action items, but then have to, like, like write them out for a group and say, here's what I'm going to do. I think that's a very powerful way of having a new habit stick.
Totally. Yeah. If you guys haven't caught on by now, I use accountability as my best asset. It's in my one-on-one coaching at a high level, but it's also in a course. I'm not going to let you just sign up for a course and never like actually read it and then never actually implement it. It's for a reason, because we are what we do, not what we learn, right? We are what we do. So anyways, Jen, thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it. Are you comfortable sharing maybe where people can find you to follow your like kind of strength training journey and all that? If not, you can say no.
Yeah, well, I'm on Instagram. I'm at jitzkoff. You have to request to follow me, because I don't want any creepy. Sometimes I post things about my kids, and so I don't want any creepy people following me.